Okay, so today should be relatively quick. So we're basically just gonna go over creating just the API part of uh, Django. So we have a database and then the Django API, and we're gonna Dockerize it, and then we're gonna deploy it to AWS. So we've kind of gone through this process in a couple different variations, but we're just gonna keep making, slight improvements and tweaks. So first thing is we're gonna start with a example project. When you guys do the challenge for today, you can either create your own from scratch or use something you've previously done or modify something you've previously done. Here we're starting with this, and I have it. I basically forked it and cloned it. So this is something that exists in the Platoon space, but I've got it locally, and I have my own, my own copy on GitHub. So just taking a look. So anytime you get something new, it's good to take a look around and see what's happening. So we have this. So we have the project. I can tell just based on the files that are here that Wines is the project, and that there's an app. It's like there's one app called Wine API. So I'm going to take a look in the settings. I have installed apps. I have REST framework, which I don't think we've directly really used much, but it's there. And then the Wine API. This is the app that that I or whatever user made right here. And then we can keep going down, and we can see the databases. So looks like we're using Postgres. The database name is Wines, and then we have user and password and host and port. Any question? Okay, and one other thing it's good to look at is the URLs. So let's see. Philip, can you tell me about what the URLs is?
I know that we've got like the paths wine where it has that include wine API dot URLs. I
Uh-huh.
think that'll go to the wine API URLs, and there should be like a view function there that I think it'll call.
Okay.
Uh,
So we have this top level URL. So how does this translate into, let's say, a user action in the browser?
when they go to wherever the server is running, and then the endpoint wines.
Exactly. Yeah. So if I'm running this locally, it'll be localhost/wines. If I'm running this, on an EC2 instance, it'll be whatever my IP address is. And if I get, like a domain registered and all that, it'll be your domain name. Okay, cool. So so anything that comes in with whatever/wines is going to get handed off to what?
The app URLs py.
Yes. Yes. So wine app, which is right here, this folder, and then .urls, that's this file right here. So in this file, we've got some further processing. So what are the two kind of subdomains that are available here? So
Looks
we're
like
already at, let's just say localhost/wines/
looks like the top one, if you just do wines, it'll bring you to probably just view all of the wines.
Yep. Okay.
And then the next one, it looks like you can specify a primary key. to view a specific one. And that would just be at the end of the endpoint we saw in the other URL file.
Okay, cool. So if I go to /wines, this URL's folder, it's gonna pass me off. That's what this include does. It's gonna pass me off for further evaluation over here. And if there's nothing else, then it's gonna basically call this function. So this views.wines view. Let's see if I can go here. So here is an API view. So I'm subclassing API view, which comes from Django REST framework. And then there are a whole bunch of these different views. This is the most generic one, and it allows you to overwrite basically get, post, put, delete, etc. So any of the HTTP methods, there's a corresponding method that you can overwrite here. So if I make a GET request to localhost /wines/nothing, then this is the function that is going to get called implicitly. So we're not told that. We're not told like, hey, if you call blah, 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 if you call GET, then call this. If you call post, then call this, etc. So this is kind of abstracted away from us. So Django is doing whatever magic Django does, and it's gonna decide which method to call. We just have to define the methods. So if I go to just the normal, if I make just a normal GET request, there's going to be two conditions. One is if I pass in something. So this is actually another thing to note is that these are the same, right? Both of these routes are the same. Like the same class is going to be responsible for handling both of these routes. So if I go to /wines/nothing, that means that there's no primary key getting passed in. And right here, we're saying, hey, this thing on the right is basically just the variable name that you want to use. And this thing on the left is the type. And there are a few different types. You can have a string, you can have an integer, you can have like a slug. But okay, so if I've made the request to /nothing, then there's no primary key. So this is the one that's going to get called. And what am I going to get back? Tyler. So what am I going to get back if I go to /wines/nothing?
You are going to get back all of the wine.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a standard kind of REST structure. So you have a way to like get everything, often called like a list view, and you have a way to get one particular thing, which is often called a detail view. So, if I want to get everything, that's usually the default generic thing. I'm just going to get a list of stuff. If I want to specify, I want this particular resource, that's where we get the, whatever, /1/5/. And then if we're doing other operations like updating a resource, then it makes sense. For example, this put, so put is update, that we're going to have to specify the particular thing we want. So if we don't, it's just like, oh, do I update everything? But you could do. That's just not a common thing. So, Jesus, can you walk me through? Actually, why don't you walk me through post?
I have one quick question before we move on. So you have it like kind of built into a conditional statement in the get method there.
Yes.
would it be bad practice to just build an entire another class for like the specific, like one class for like grabbing just the specific wine and then one class for grabbing all the wines? Or is it better to do it this way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think there's like a definite answer to that, but I'm kind of following the format that this particular thing gives me.
Okay.
So API view expects me to override these methods, to provide my own custom implementation for these generic methods here. So there is no like, there's only get. There isn't like get detail and get list. There's only get. So you wouldn't really be able to separate those out if you wanted to use this particular thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I have a question about the PK, primary key equals none.
Yeah.
Is that the same as primary key equals false?
Let's see. I mean, effectively, yes, it would be the same. I mean, none is falsy.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking because I'm trying to figure out what the code is doing, because it seems like this is if you pass in a primary key, so then okay, okay, never mind. The variable is changed to the primary key. Gotcha. That's what makes the code shorter. Okay.
Yeah. So this is just a default value because I'm not always going to have a primary key. So if I go to this route, I'm not going to have a primary key. So,
right.
And if I don't have one, that's how I know that I want basically
Yeah.
list view.
Okay.
I'm just gonna locally install the dependencies so I can jump into the source code here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I don't know why this is not picking it up. Let me just try this real quick. Okay, sorry. I don't know why. I could mess around with this later, but if you were to jump into the source code, you would eventually. It's pretty confusing, but you would eventually be able to see that it expects these methods to get overridden. Okay, cool. So that's the basic idea. I have these. So if anyone makes a GET request, a POST request, there's nothing really terribly complicated. We're just taking a request, we're processing it, and we're going to make another request to the database, get that back, serialize it, basically turn that database data into Python data, Python data types, and then into JSON. Because we are ultimately going to return JSON. So this response thing will basically turn whatever we put in here into JSON. Okay.
I got a quick question, Chad.
Yeah.
The wine serializers, that's essentially a middleware, considered a middleware.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I think you could say that.
Okay.
It's something, yeah, I'm not, yeah, I'm not sure if it would technically be middleware or not, but it's something that kind of exists to just passively be there. So everything will kind of go through it. So in that sense, yeah, I think we call it middleware. So you guys have been implementing your own thing or using a lower level version of this. This is kind of this is basically a nice Python or a nice Django way of doing it. There's even more abstract ways of doing it, which will kind of allow you to do more defaults. But so here we have a serializer. So what does a serializer do? Does anyone know?
It just
Oh, sorry. Doesn't it turn stuff into like binary? And then back into JSON?
Yeah, exactly. So a serializer is something that basically turns something from one format into another format. And those two formats could be anything. So it could be, binary to Python or Python to JSON or really anything. So this basically allows you to interact between a database and your Python code and then your front end API, which doesn't consume Python code. And there's some specifics here. We can look at some of this stuff. So this is basically a way of determining what our JSON response is going to have in it. So we'll some of this stuff will be a little more obvious once we get it spun up and running.
I mean, do you have to use this stuff? Because I mean, doesn't like a large majority of data that's pulled from the front end come in a JSON format?
Yes, and that's basically what we're doing here is we're creating that JSON.
Oh, okay.
So if you're using some other third-party API, yeah, you're just the consumer, right? You're just going to grab the JSON. But here, since we're responsible for making the API, we have to make that JSON, and that's basically what we're doing here.
Okay, got it.
So you could, you could operate at a lower level, which is what you guys have been doing, and say, I'm going to make a request to the database. I'm going to parse through that response and then construct, basically like a dictionary out of that, like whatever I want to include, and then turn that dictionary into JSON and then send that JSON as a response, like making sure to include the right headers and so on. So all this other stuff is basically convenience to make this process a little less tedious. All right. So that's, yeah, I think that's a code. It's not, it's relatively straightforward. You can take a look more if you want. So now we'll look at the Docker compose file. So this is I think basically the standard one we've been using. So when you run it, it will spin up a database and then it will listen. Basically, it'll accept requests from your local host machine, from your local machine into the container, which is why if you look at the settings, we're going to connect to 5454. Because if we're running the Django API locally and we have a containerized Postgres database, we need to map those ports. Okay, but we're going to do something a little different. Instead of running the Django API locally and the Postgres API as a container, we're going to containerize both of them. So I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to create a Docker file. and I'll paste that in. Okay, so doing a couple things here. This image is basically a convenience because we need to install psycopg, this Postgres wrapper library. I'm using this as a base image. We could use another simpler base image and then install a bunch of other stuff. So that's also an option. But this is just an example of, depending on what stuff you need, you might have to use a different base image. So that might require some playing around with stuff. We can use this, and then we're going to work through. This is all pretty standard. We're going to copy over the requirements, install everything. And then this part is a little tricky, but we are going to use Unicorn, green unicorn. I can just look that up. So this is a WSGI HTTP server. So this is just kind of basically like a standard Python interface for HTTP servers. You don't need to really know about that. It's just if you're using Python code and you want to have an HTTP server, it's probably going to conform to this or a related what do you call it? Related protocol. And you don't really need to know about this because this command should just work. But what we're doing is, instead of having like the development server do everything, this is an application server. So this is something that's more purpose-built for handling requests. Okay, so this will run, and the name here comes from the project. So project.wsgi application. So when you do yours, you'll have to change that. Okay, so I've got this Docker file here to describe how I want to run the API. So the Django code is going to run in this environment. My database is fine. I can still use the same stuff in my database. All right, so we go over here, and now I'm going to modify the Docker compose file to control both of these containers, the API container and the Postgres container. We'll take a look at this. It's slightly different. The one thing you might notice is the database doesn't need to do port mapping anymore. Why doesn't the database need to do port mapping?
Is it because you put them in the same container? Or
Okay, that's on the right track. So how many containers do I have here?
You have two containers?
Yeah. So there are two containers. So a service is basically a container. So we have the API container and the database container. So we have two containers. So it's not, the database isn't running in the same container as the API.
is it the depends on DB? Like that saying pretty much the same thing?
Okay, that's also a good thought. So this depends on is basically a way of telling Docker Compose that this thing needs to be up first. Kind of so this thing has to work in order for this thing to work. So the answer is that when you run this, Docker Compose, both of these containers will be running on the same Docker network. So we no longer need to map from the local host to the Postgres container, because they're going to be both these containers are going to be on the same network.
So is that like similar to like if we were, running these without a container on our local machine, like how we would not map anything because we could just go to the local port?
Yeah. So there's kind of like 3 ways of doing it. One is just all running everything locally. Your Postgres is local and your Django is local. In that case, you don't need any port mapping. What we've been doing is Postgres is containerized, Django is local, so we have to do port mapping. Now we're kind of we're going to make them match again, except they're both going to be containerized. Okay. And yeah, so now we can go ahead and I'm just going to run these commands individually first. So this will be the runner. You don't have to do this. It's just a convenience. So I'm going to add this script. All right, so first thing, I'm just going to run this. Take a look at the Docker Compose file. You'll notice that it's starting with the database. So the database is going to be built from, it's just going to pull down whatever that image is in Docker Hub. Here, though, we're saying the build is doc, which means the Docker file you need is in the same directory that you are. Eventually, we're going to get to the state where when you're developing, once you get like your API in the state you want it, you'll push up an image to Docker Hub.
In that case, would we just pull our Postgres image and our API image, and then you'd be set to run, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So it looks like stuff's running. So if I do Docker PS, I can see that both of these containers are running. I have my Postgres container, and then I have this DRF wine API. And this DRF wine API, I should be able to forward, anything localhost 8,000 to the 8,000 of the container. So let's see if we can make a request there. All right, let's do a new one. $8,000/wines. And this is going to be a GET request. Okay, so we have an issue. So this is not.
Use 800 instead of 8,000, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So we still have an error, but we're getting an error from Django now. So this is a pain to find, but let's see. So here is an error. Is the server running on host local host and accepting connections on port 5454?
Like, so I think the database and the settings is different than what's running currently.
Yeah, exactly. So we didn't update the settings. So we're not running this locally anymore. So this will be the default post 5432. So I'm gonna spin this down. So Docker compose down. Okay, and I'm gonna spin it back up. So one thing you have to watch out for is sometimes, because Docker so aggressively caches stuff, sometimes you can make changes to your code and then Docker will just ignore that. We'll see if this is working. Okay, we got an error. Let's see what the error is. Okay, so cannot connect to server, blah, blah, blah. Is the server running on localhost 5432? All right, so we'll have to do some debugging here. So first, Docker PS, I can see that this is running and it looks like it's operating on 5432. And let's make sure that everything else lines up here. So I'm gonna open this to the right. So we have user, Postgres, password, Postgres, Postgres DB wines. So that looks like it should be correct. Let me try connecting directly to the database, which I don't think I can do right now. So I can do that if I use Docker exec. Because I didn't expose a port mapping here, so I have to use Docker exec. I'm gonna do Docker exec, and this Postgres container is E9 -IT, and then I'll try using bash. Okay, maybe sh.
I think it's exec it and then container.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'm here inside of the container. So now what I want to do is I want to connect to the database here. So I'm going to do PSQL and then -H should be local host. -P should be the default. I don't think I have to specify these because it's the default, but I'll do it anyway. And then the user is going to be Postgres. And the password will ask for later. And then the database -D is wines. Okay. So now I can see that the database actually exists. And I can describe it. Okay. So the database actually exists in the container is running. So that looks to be correct. So I'm gonna exit out of this. So there's probably an issue with the API container. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to wipe everything out and try running it again. Because I suspect, even though it was trying to listen on 5432, I think there's another issue. So I'm gonna run this again. It won't move things. So this is not one of my planned errors. This is I was expecting this to work. Okay. All right, let me try also executing the migrations just to see if that works. So Python migrate. Let's see here. There we go. I think this is called, we'll see if this is called the same thing. Okay. All right, we've got some kind of issue here. Hmm. Let's see. Well, I tell you what, why don't we'll take a break and I will work on this and then hopefully I'll figure it out by the time we come back. You're welcome. I'll leave the video running. I'm gonna stop the recording.